here with Boomer Anderson of the Decoding Superhuman podcast. Boomer and I became friends when I sat beside him at the Flowfest biohacking conference, Germany's biohacking conference in Munich. And we've bumped into each other in several countries since then. And he has a lot of unique ideas to share with everyone, which is why he's a perfect kind of candidate for this event. Just to give you a bit of background, so he's filled in this bio here. I'm not going to read it, but he comes from a, say the sort of Wall Street financial background, and then had some personal health crisis or so, and then became a biohacker, got into the biohacking world and the superhuman world. Would you like to expound on that?
Sure. I mean, it's kind of interesting touching on that, why is a guy in finance in health? And, I've always been interested in health, particularly with the lens of performance. How do I get my body to perform at its best? Now, when I was in finance, that equated to how do I sleep less and work more? When I sleep less and work more, ultimately, where did that land me? And not such a good position. And so about 4 years ago, I was diagnosed with coronary artery disease, which is the leading preventable cause of death in the world, and also now classified as comorbidities. So you can say that all of that experience in health, as well as data, helped me really come to where I am today with regards to health, but also helped me unpack that condition that is coronary artery disease, look at it through a bio-individual lens, and also helps me advise entrepreneurs who are changing the world through that lens really of health optimization rather than disease management, which is what we're so good at right now in society.
Understood. And so your main platform, so you have this health consulting, coaching aspect, and you also have the Decoding Superhuman podcast. Are those your main activities now?
Sure. So the podcast is really the forward-facing activity, and Decoding Superhuman podcast is a top 100 business and careers podcast in about 6 different countries, depending on the week, and top 250 in the United States. Behind that, I work one-to-one with just a handful of people in a health consulting relationship, really with the lens of performance optimization. And so what I do is I get to a very, very granular level. Given my background in finance, I'm very comfortable with extremely large data sets. And so you can think of this as leveraging a lot of the technologies that we have today, whether that be omics technologies and lab testing, which we're going to talk a little bit about today, but also looking at quantified self, and then stacking that data to make precision recommendations based on your biochemistry. That's the health consulting. There's also some other businesses that I'm involved in, predominantly in the nootropics and food space, all as well as, frankly, a foundation that I'm involved in called the Home Hope Association, which seeks to really shift the tide when it comes to this discussion around health. And what the Home Hope Association does, and we can delve a little bit more into it if you want, is if you think about how health practitioners are taught traditionally, there is not really a framework for them to get into a very large discussion around health optimization. Right now, we are taught how to do a lot of disease management, and disease management is great. And if you get shot or have a disease, yes, go to the hospital. That's fantastic. But how do we get into a discussion around you living your best life? And what do you need to actually do that? And that's where the Home Hope Association really thrives and is looking to plug the gap and change that conversation in health.
Okay. Yeah, I would love to hear more about that. But for now, let's go to one of the important questions that would be on people's minds and is on my mind. What are you advising your clients at this stage? So you're dealing with very high performance people, CEOs, etc. What are you telling them about the current situation? How are you communicating with them at the moment and helping them?
Yeah, sure. So if you look at the game plan, or what seems to be the game plan for a lot of my clients, particularly in regards to the world. Most of them are grounded. Most of them have had businesses either severely impacted, i.e., shut, or impacted in a way that has handicapped them in terms of their day-to-day operations. It's expected in a world where we are either shelter in place or potentially looking at this communal immunity situation in certain countries, etc. Now, with that, what exactly happens? Well, there's an elevation of stress. If there's not money coming in the door, if there is not business coming in the door, people will have to still pay their employees. And so there's an elevation of stress. And with that elevation and stress, usually correlates to uh, a decrease in sleep, or at least sleep quality.
Mhm.
So what we're looking at now, and what we're specifically focusing on there, is just optimizing the human. A lot of my discussions with these guys have luckily been going on for months, if not years, ahead of this event. And so, chance favors those who are best prepared, right? And so, if I'm in the business of building the anti-fragile human, if you will, what we've done in the past is work on stress resilience and sleep optimization. Now, the entrepreneur, the high performer, faces that already on a day-to-day basis. It's just now that is accelerated by 10x when your business is shutting down or needs to shut down. And so in that case, what are we doing? We're looking at really reevaluating stress optimization strategies. We're looking at evaluating sleep optimization strategies, looking at nutrition in particular, and then what other exogenous things do we need to make sure on a day-to-day basis that person is doing in order to make sure that this, if it does happen to them, if they do get it, the impact is less, or how do they avoid it in general? Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Yes, it does. Are these clients like dealing with like shutdowns at the moment and, on the edge of disaster?
Uh,
Or any specific?
Not on the edge of disaster, but let's say, look at any economic downturn. And just this morning, the US reported the most applications for unemployment, it's either ever or since 2008. And what happens there is you have a natural downturn in the economy. If you see stock markets have gone down about 30 or 20+% in the past couple of days, that is naturally going to have an impact on business, but also on people's spending behavior. So you have people who are used to making a certain level of income all of a sudden saying that, okay, if my income is halved, how does that impact my life? As if my income is not consistent, how does that impact my life? If my income goes to zero, how does that impact my life? And so naturally, there's a lot of questions, and at this point, just modeling out to see, what the impact is going to be on them. So the next few weeks will really tell how sustained this downturn is going to be. But for right now, I think most people are planning for pretty bad situations economically.
Right. And so what you said is that you've been helping, coaching these individuals in reducing or being able to cope with stress, being able to sleep better. And now those learnings are being put to the test.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
So let's go through basic principles, right? And so foundationally, there's basic principles that everyone should be following when it comes to SARS-CoV-2, or what we're talking about is COVID-19, right? And so washing your hands, just basic principles. Doing what Examine likes to call physical distancing, which I prefer more than social distancing. So as you go to the grocery store, making sure that you're 1.5 to 2 meters behind or avoiding people in general, trying to keep inside. I know I was just speaking to a couple of friends in London, whereby they're allowed outside 1 time per day. Here in Amsterdam, the restrictions are not quite as high, and I thankfully have a backyard. But
One form of exercise
yeah,
has been
getting some
mandated
extra.
in England. Yeah, you can't go for a jog and then do some push-ups. It's one or the other.
Yeah, so if you're training for a triathlon right now, getting that run, getting that swim, getting that bike ride every single day, probably not going to happen.
Right.
But there's some interesting things, and when it comes to movement, I also talk to the clients as well. Like, what are you going to do if you're stuck inside all day long? Yeah, you can watch Netflix all day, or you can put
Or
that to work.
CNN.
Or CNN, and CNN is just going to terrify you.
Yeah.
So what can we do instead? All of these guys, the people that I particularly speak to, all still have a business to run. And when a business is in crisis mode, oftentimes you're doing a lot more work than you would in your normal day. But how do you break that up so that you're moving and you don't look down at your Oura ring or your Garmin at the end of the day and say, like, hey, I had 15 steps today? There's certain techniques that you can get into by utilizing pomodoros, etc., so that you ensure movement throughout the day.
Yeah. So for those of you who don't know, Pomodoro is a time management slash concentration technique for focusing on one task
Yeah.
for 25-minute blocks with a 5-minute rest. Are you saying that you've built a kind of Pomodoro plus exercise protocol?
Oh, this is a great topic, right? And so Pomodoro, as you mentioned, is the Italian word for tomato, I believe. But the guy who built it originally had just a tomato clock, and it's 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. You can play with that. It's usually, the longer period that you go on, the more time you need off in order to rest. But it is a focusing technique. And what I like to use is sort of, let's take, for instance, 25 minutes on, 5 minutes off. In that 5 minute break time, what kind of movement can you do? And so I have a little checklist whereby, in addition to my workout, I want to get 300 squats done per day, 200 push ups, and just 100 of some sort of core exercise done per day. Now, I'm not going to do
that's your current thing?
That's my current thing on a day-to-day basis. Now, that's not just one, that's not like what I do in 5 minutes, because that's pretty hard to do in 5 minutes. But
Superhuman.
if I split it up into, let's say, 10 sets, that way I'm not sweating. I'm not necessarily needing to take a shower every break in my Pomodoro, but it gets my blood flowing. It also helps my focus throughout the day. And amazingly, you can get a lot more done, and it does help with that resilience as well.
And how are you tracking that?
So I have a to-do. I use Todoist in terms of my to-do list function.
Yeah.
And every day I have a recurring task, which has a list of both physical and mental activities that I want to do during this particular period. And I just check it off. But also, you can see this whiteboard behind me. What you can't see is sort of the tick marks that every time I do a set, which I just try to make it be 10 Pomodoros throughout the day. Every time I do a set, it's a check. Okay. And so when I do that set, it's 30 squats, it's 20 push-ups, it's 10 of, I have a yoga mat here, so an ab roller exercise. Nice. And you just kind of check the box. Nice. It's not the most perfect workout, but the gyms are closed here. And so how do you keep from blowing up like a sumo wrestler, although they are aerobically, they're reasonably fit, but I don't necessarily want to look that way. How do you keep from doing that in a time period like this?
Nice. Okay, switching gears.
Let's switch.
Yeah, I see that part of your system is heavily based on lab testing. Could you give us some thoughts about how you think about that?
So when we look at the whole premise behind lab testing, there's really two. It's sort of how do we get to a bio-individual level? So what makes up you? But also, how do we get you to understand and buy into the protocols that we're going to recommend to you? So when we look at lab testing, what I'm trying to assess here is what exactly do you need? As a person, Alex, you're going to need something different than me. We have different lifestyles. We have different things that we do. We have different sleep patterns. All of these things are different. But yet at the same time, if you were to open my RSS feed right now, I would probably get 10,000 different recommendations in terms of what is right for me when it comes to my health. What our lab testing protocol aims to do is to take that N of 7 billion and say, whether it's vegan, keto, whatever, figure out what exactly is right for you. Now, we do this predominantly through the lens of metabolomics. And so let's start with just kind of the building blocks here. And so genetics, which is something that most people are familiar with by now, is really the blueprint of where you should be. It's a code that you have and it has been running you throughout your entire life. Now, genetics is that where you should be, but we need to know where you are right now in this moment. So if we transcend down the omics technologies, we go from genetics down to metabolomics, which is really where you are on a cellular level and where you have been recently. So that information becomes very useful, especially in the discussion around immune system function or just general nutrient need. And so what we do is we run a blood, urine, and stool test on people, and we're able to assess you at the level of metabolome for things like bacterial imbalances in your gut. We're able to look at nutrient need on a cellular level. We're able to look at toxic burden. All of this is particularly important when it comes to looking at the immune system and the immune system function.
Mhm.
So if you already have a heavy toxic burden, we need to start taking proactive action starting today to remove some of that. A very common heavy toxic burden is something like mercury toxicity. You and I growing up, and I'm not sure how it was in New Zealand. Actually, New Zealand may be a little bit better. But in the United States, I was given amalgams growing up, and dental amalgams very commonly had mercury. And so mercury toxicities, when I was unpacking those layers of the onion that I talked about earlier, mercury toxicities were one of the issues that I had to deal with. And so by knowing that information, we now have not the blueprint, but the battle plan for you. And so we can attack this really with the lens of optimizing you, making you at your best, so that when something like a SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 comes around, you're prepared. And
Mhm.
so what we're doing there is we're looking at then nutrient and even potentially hormone balancing to bring you to your quote unquote best performance levels.
Okay, so let's get specific on the immunity side of things because I think people have been, kind of deprioritizing it a bit over other markers like inflammation, the sort of trendier ones.
Mhm.
So, what are you testing for in terms of immunity? What can you share with people if they wanted to, do their own lab testing or whatever, however they go about it? What would you recommend to look at?
Sure. So, if you're looking at just in general your immune system function, of course, there are things like white blood cells that you can look at. You can look at T cell counts even if you wanted to get into it. But what we can also look at is that toxic burden that I alluded to earlier. And so, by testing you at the metabolomic level, what we can see is where your body's immune system is focusing. And so, if you have a heavy toxic burden in the form of heavy metals, if you have a depleted glutathione system, if you have less than optimal vitamin C or antioxidant function, we know that the immune system may be compromised.
Mhm.
And so, by having that information, we can now look at precision supplements. Or it doesn't, and I think the word supplement itself carries in some eyes a negative connotation. But what I mean there is complementing the whole. So let's say you have a vitamin C insufficiency. If you have an insufficient amount of vitamin C and therefore your immune system or antioxidant system may be compromised, what we can do is we can actually look at either getting that for you in terms of an exogenous supplement or altering your diet to ensure that you get more vitamin C. Now, we can also delve into the gut immune system. And what we look at is a 3-day stool test. And I stress 3 days over one day because in one day, sometimes not everything comes out, and you may not be able to tell exactly what's going on. And in the 3-day stool test, what we're able to see are parasites, bacterial imbalances, fungus overgrowth, those types of the things that may be pulling from your body's immune system and detracting it from fighting off some of these exogenous environmental influences like COVID-19. And so, if we are able to detect all of that, detect your imbalances in bacteria and address them through maybe something like a probiotic, we're able to, and probiotics are very controversial. So, probiotics, in the sense, what we're trying to do there is create a party of your bacteria and make sure that they eventually go back into balance, but making sure that that bacteria, that gut, is healthy so that your gut immune system can fight off any potential influences from your external environment.
Okay.
But the way to test those, there's a few things that we can look at, right? So what we use is we use common tests through Genova, and Genova has a very wonderful panel called the NutriVal, but also they have the GIFX as well as the Allergix 90. And I'll go through the role of each one of those, if that's okay, Alex. So the NutriVal itself looks at, again, all of these are sort of at the level of the metabolome, but what we're looking at there are predominantly nutrient deficiencies as well as toxic burden. The GIFX is that 3-day stool test where we're able to look at parasites, bacterial imbalances, as well as fungus overgrowth. And then the Allergix 90, which is an interesting test because it looks at food sensitivities. And food sensitivities, again, another controversial one, but over time, low-grade inflammation can lead to inflammatory, cascade, if you will. And so if we're able to nip these in the butt and address food sensitivities through something like an elimination diet, we can now look at optimizing that gut immune system function for performance over time.
Okay. So when you're looking at, let's say, immunity, which is quite important at the moment, and you get your report and it has your readout and then the healthy range from X to Y, how do you identify whether it's actually, because that's a pretty broad array, and how do you actually identify if someone's on point or on track?
Yeah, so reference ranges are a point of annoyance with me, because depending on what lab you go to, your reference range may be influenced by somebody who is 12 years old or 90 years old. And that also depends on the biomarker, right? And what reference or what comparison is it for me as a 34-year-old to look at someone who is 90, right? Or someone who is 12? Is that necessarily a fair comparison? And so what we like to do is we look at that reference range and we then establish our own reference ranges, which is basically where you should be if you were at your optimal performance state, which is between the ages of 21 to 30. And so we've established our own reference ranges. So you get your lab results back, and then I, or somebody who's been trained in the same methodology that I have, would look at you in the context of what it would be like to be 21 to 30 years old.
And that's your methodology?
It's not my methodology. So going back to the Home Hope Association, which is a non-for-profit organization that seeks to educate doctors and practitioners on the idea of health optimization medicine, that was started by my mentor, Dr. Theodore Achacoso. It's been in practice for well over 10 years.
Yeah.
And we use it to really seek both nutrient as well as hormone balancing.
Okay. So that organization has kind of developed.
It's been around for quite a long time.
Yeah, understood. Lovely. Okay, moving on. What is the lesson that you hope people will learn from COVID-19?
Oh man, this is with all of this going on, right? And it is tragic to see that it took a crisis like this. But what I hope from all of this is that there is a waking up, a collective waking up across the globe, that health is important. And taking care of your health, taking a proactive approach to your health is important. It's within your control, and it's something you should do today. because far too many of us, we get caught up in our careers. And granted, I've been guilty of this in the past, but we get caught up in our careers, our lives. We, first leave school, we get into our career, then we have kids, we get into our kids' lives, then we still have our career and our kids, our career, everything stacks up, and we forget about ourselves. And then it comes to the point where you're kind of getting in your late 30s and you're like, yeah, I'll focus on it when I'm 40. And then you get to 40 and you're like, hey, I'll focus on it when I'm 50. And then you're retired. And then pretty soon something happens and boom, then you care about your health. What if we can address it now? And my big hope out of all of this is that people come to address their health in a much more proactive way.
Nice. So yeah, and one of the words that I heard there that resonated was the wake up call. So you're hoping that there's a wake up call. Okay, great. Okay, so on to some of my questions. Which or authority have you been recommending the most and why, or which have influenced you the most and why over these last days and weeks?
In case you couldn't tell by everything we just talked about, I love getting back to data.
Yep.
And just looking for good data sources. That in itself is a challenge, but kind of fun to look at as well. So then you kind of look at Johns Hopkins. They continue to produce a day-to-day data source as to new cases, as well as people who have passed away, unfortunately, due to this. If you're looking for information as to prevention, your local health authorities, actually the Dutch government here produces a great website informing people what to do. And a lot of that stuff is very rapidly updated as more and more information gets disseminated. Examine.com that's with an E, has a great guide to the coronavirus and what you can potentially do to prevent yourself.
Nice.
That's an excellent one. There's so many out there, but there's also a lot of crap, so you got to be careful.
Yeah, there's a lot of noise, and so what I'm hearing from you is that you're John Hopkins, Dutch government. You're going to source on a lot of these things. Examine is like I guess one layer of filter. You're not following any particular gurus or health authorities or anything specifically.
Yeah, I take into account what they say because it influences public opinion and also results in a lot of questions being asked of me. But what I like to go back to is the data. So if people are hypothesizing about 5G and a connection there, okay, how do I get back to the data? And what does the data say? How do I get back to the data when people try and make a connection about diet, etc.? That's really what I encourage people to do.
Okay. I have a next question, which is a quickie. Which purchases have you made as a result of the pandemic?
What purchases have I made? Well, I did buy a lot of vitamin C.
Okay.
I am in the process of potentially building a home gym. I have an X3 bar here already, but I may expand that out a little bit because we just announced that gyms will likely be closed until June 1st, and it's March 26th. As a person who likes to go to the gym, that's probably not acceptable to me. So that's been one.
Dr. John Jackwish has agreed to appear at the summit, by the way. The inventor.
Good. You'll have fun with him. Dr. Jackwish has been on my show a couple of times, and he's a great guy. Lots of fun. And the X3 bar, by the way, it's like a 10-minute workout. So if you're a busy person, it's one of the best devices out there.
So that's a good product recommendation for everyone who we might be in this for the long haul. It's probably one of the best home exercise items that you can invest in. It's kind of like the ARX machine, which costs like $100,000.
Yeah, except for this one's $500. Yeah. So if we look at kind of
for a bar and a pad, right?
It is. And so if you look at kind of things that I would invest in that cost less than $500, right? I have a Berkey water filter right here, but I've had that since announcing. I continually go to my coffee roaster and stock up because I'm worried that someday they will shut down. And if
When we went
life,
to,
what's that? I go to a coffee roaster.
the one
So
we went to, Java Plane.
not too far from there. So I'm going to take you next time you come through Amsterdam. I'm going to take you to this place. It's called Rum Baba, but they remain roasting throughout this, and I will continue to buy coffee from them as long as they're open, and I will keep a few bags stocked. Apparently, toilet paper is what people stock up on. We haven't done too much of that, but you know, to each their own, right? So.
Okay, next. Do you have any regrets that have modified your perspective or made you stronger during this situation?
Regrets about life in general, or regrets altogether?
Like let's say you were a brick and mortar business owner, so you've been building the podcast, it's an information business, that kind of thing, or any kind of health regrets or anything.
So health regrets, not so much. I think in terms of having that wake up call 4 years ago rather than today was very helpful in terms of just getting my ducks in a line with regards to my own health, my immune system, etc. Having that process that I put in place in the framework of health optimization, medicine and practice has been very helpful for both me and my clients. I do think I've been very lucky in the sense most everything I do is virtual. So I don't have a real estate obligation to worry about right now.
Yep.
There's always that regret of in the past not living in the present moment. But to add on to an early question that you asked, one of the things that this whole crisis has made me realize is that living in the present moment is very key.
Nice. It is a challenging time. Here's a nice one. Did you develop any new or funny habits as a result of the situation?
Well, I told you about my to-do list, right? And so my to-do list has a physical and a mental checklist. And I titled those physical and mental checklists as kind of as a joke, as zombie apocalypse training. But every morning now, I go through a series of routines that is really seeking to just optimize everything about me: gut, immune system function, physical performance, mental health, etc. I've doubled down on sleep diligence in terms of just making sure that all of my routines are there. And even if I don't hit it, just making sure I give myself the space the next day to rest when I need to.
Nice.
There's a common, and here we go. There we go. It's a great way to get started. I unplugged myself, but there's a I can start over with that one. So, in terms of the routines that I've developed since this crisis, if you will, has come on, I've doubled down on my focus and emphasis on rest and recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And what do I mean by that? Even if I don't get a perfect night's sleep, I will allow myself the space to rest, to meditate, to take a nap the next day. Whereas before, I think it's very common. I mean, you're an entrepreneur too. It's like, how do you plow through this? Get another cup of coffee and go. But now I'm allowing myself that space because I know that I need this meat suit that I live in to be performing at its absolute best during these times.
Nice. Okay, so I think we can wrap it up there. I was wondering what resources would you like to share with our audience for learning more about you, what you do, etc.
Sure. So there's a number of different places where you can find out about what I do. DecodingSuperhuman.com or Decoding Superhuman in Google right now will give you a lot of information about me. I release a podcast once a week, and they're on various domains of health optimization. So even if you're sitting here and saying immune system function is important, remember that your body is a network of systems, and getting started somewhere uh, is very important. So you can go down any one of those domains and it will serve you pretty well. You can also find out about the framework that I laid out here today called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice at homehope.org. And if you're a practitioner, you can sign up there. But also, there's some of the nootropic that I'm involved in. If you're into cognitive enhancement during a period like this,
Mhm.
is called blue cannatine. And
You have one handy?
I don't have one right now in my mouth, but it dyes your tongue blue. So blue cannatine stands for it's the ingredients, which are methylene blue, cannabidiol, caffeine, and nicotine. And I've found it extremely effective for verbal fluency, short-term memory, as well as focus. And so if you want to experiment with some nootropics while you're stuck at home with your kids, that's certainly a good place to start.
It's a good time if you don't have like important meetings with new people.
And if you do, there's baking soda for it, right? And maybe that's another thing. The collective world will get more used to people with blue tongues, and well, as we work virtually.
The change. Okay. Any parting words that you'd like to leave people with on this time of interestingness?
Going back to what I said earlier, this is an opportunity for all of us to wake up to the idea of a proactive approach to health. There are many people out there who are willing to serve if you are willing to make the call. And so if you need help with it, you can reach out to me. You can reach out to yourself, Alex. I know you're very involved in this space. And we're all willing to help you get started, but please just take one step forward and take care of yourself.